once filtrate moves through the renal tubule, remember it's being modified because after filtration, you also have reabsorption and then secretion. And so ultimately, by the time that filtrate gets to the end of the renal tubule, it's been altered in order to form urine. So that urine then has to be transported from the kidneys out of the body. So the DCT, this here stands for the distal convoluted tubule, which is the last segment of the renal tubule. So from the distal convoluted tubules, the filtrate, which is now urine, drains into collecting ducts. And these structures are still microscopic, but the minor calyces and the major calyces you can actually start to see. So basically, the nephrons are located right here on the border between the cortex and the medulla. And so as the urine is being made, it drains through collecting ducts into the minor calyces, which converge into the major calyces, which converge into this region called the renal pelvis. From the renal pelvis, the urine is transported through the ureter down to the urinary bladder. And then from the urinary bladder, the urine leaves the body through another tube called the urethra. So you have one ureter per kidney, and they both deliver the urine into the same urinary bladder. So you only have one urinary bladder, but you've got two kidneys, so you have to have two ureters to deliver that urine to the bladder. Now there's smooth muscle in the walls of the ureters, and that smooth muscle helps to move the urine in one direction from the kidneys towards the urinary bladder. And that's because recall that smooth muscle does those rhythmic contractions called peristalsis. So it's almost like the smooth muscle is milking the urine from the kidney towards the urinary bladder. The lumen, or the space of the ureter, is lined with a type of epithelium called transitional epithelium. And this epithelium has a little bit of stretch to it so that it can expand as urine is moving through the ureter, and then it can kind of recoil or go back to a smaller opening when urine is not being produced. There are also goblet cells associated with this epithelium, and goblet cells are special cells that secrete mucus. And this mucus helps to protect the lumen, or the inside of the ureter, as the urine is passing through it, because urine can be sometimes really acidic, sometimes it's alkaline. So this mucus just kind of helps to protect the ureter as urine is making its way to the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder is a hollow organ that temporarily stores urine. So the urinary bladder keeps you from just constantly having to pee. So you can see the ureters, one from each kidney, comes into the bladder here. And then the bladder holds onto the urine until you go and find a bathroom and allow yourself to voluntarily urinate to get the urine out of your body. Now, there's an area in the urinary bladder called the trigone region, or the trigone area. And tri should make you think of like a triangle. And it's this area in between the openings of the ureters. So these are where the ureters deliver the urine into the kidneys. And then the opening of the urethra, and these form a triangle. And this area is clinically significant because this is a common site for bladder infections. So bladder infections typically occur when bacteria from outside the body makes its way into the urinary bladder. And it typically goes into the urinary bladder through the urethra. There is smooth muscle in the walls of the urinary bladder, and it's also lined with transitional epithelium just like the ureters. This smooth muscle is involved in helping you to move that material, move the urine, out of the urinary bladder through the urethra. Now there are some circular bands of muscle tissue called sphincters that help you control the passage of urine from the urinary bladder out of the body through the urethra. So there's an internal urethral sphincter here, and as the urinary bladder fills up, the urine puts pressure on that sphincter and it opens it up. And this is when you get the kind of the urge to go pee. Now, peeing is clinically called micturition, or you may have also heard it called voiding or urinating. So micturition is the clinical term for releasing urine. So your bladder can hold a couple hundred milliliters of fluid. So 500 milliliters is half a liter. So we're looking at less than half a liter. When you have about 150 milliliters of urine in the bladder, you start to get the urge to pee, but you can override it. If the bladder starts to get too full, though, when there's about 300 to 400 milliliters of urine in the bladder, incontinence can happen. And incontinence is involuntary micturition, or an involuntary release of urine. Now, incontinence can happen for a couple of different reasons. So we all know that babies are born without the ability to control their urine. And so we put diapers on them, and the diapers help to catch the urine for us. As we get older, babies start to learn how to control the external urethral sphincter in order to prevent incontinence from happening. But as we get older, especially elderly people, may start to experience incontinence again because their skeletal muscles stop working as well as they should, and the sphincter, the external urethral sphincter, doesn't work as well as it should in order to hold the urine in the bladder. Incontinence can also happen if someone sneezes or laughs, or if you just hold it too long before you can find a bathroom, then your urinary bladder is going to force that urine out of your body. But thankfully, most of the time we can voluntarily control it, and that's because the external urethral sphincter here is made out of skeletal muscle. So when you kind of clench your pelvic floor muscles in order to keep yourself from leaking urine, you're voluntarily overriding micturition. The urethra is a tube that delivers urine from the urinary bladder out to the external environment. It's lined with mucous membranes, so it's got epithelial tissue. There's mucus that helps to protect the epithelial tissue, and yeah, so its job is just to transport material, urine, from the urinary bladder to a toilet, for example. Now, the urethra can be significantly different in length between males and females, and that's because males and females have different genitalia. So in females, the urethra is about 4 centimeters long, so that's maybe like 1.5 to 2 inches. And females are more prone to bladder infections because there's less distance between the external environment and the urinary bladder. And so bacteria can move from the external environment up through the urethra into the urinary bladder. In males, the urethra runs along the length of the penis, and so it can be about 20 centimeters long. And in males, the urethra actually serves 2 purposes. So it's involved in urinating or getting urine out of the body, but it's also a passageway for sperm and semen during ejaculation. So in males, the urethra is actually part of the urinary system and the reproductive system, whereas in females, it's only part of the urinary system. And as we mentioned, females are more prone to bladder infections because males, bacteria would have to travel all the way from the external environment all the way through the length of the penis to get to the urinary bladder. Not to say that it can't happen, but it's much more common in females.